Hi, and welcome back to Kohelet. Things are starting to get interesting. We talked about how Kohelet had begun to despair over all of his efforts in the present moment. He had realized that he has ultimately no control over them, and ultimately the product of all of his efforts can be turned over and go to somebody or to a situation over which he has no control and be used completely contrary to any of the points of his efforts in producing them. And so what's the point of all of his work in this world? There's no way to control them, there's no way to use them properly, there's no way to guarantee that, and there's no way to achieve any ultimate perfection with them. So he had begun to despair over his efforts. Well, now he suddenly does a complete about-face. And in verse 24 he says, Ein tov ba'adam, and listen to the rhythm and the poetry here for the Hebrew speakers. Ein tov ba'adam sheyochal v'shasa, v'her'a es nafsho tov ba'amalo. Gam zo ra'isi ani, ki miyad ha'elohim hi. Ki miyochal u'miyachush chutz mimeni. There is no good in man but to eat and drink, and to show his soul well by his efforts. This too I observed, for it's in God's hand. So let's understand this. Let's take this apart. Because of Kohelet's despair and the way he had begun looking at all of his efforts in the present moment and seeing that there seems to be no point in them, he had begun looking at the present. And now as he's looking at the present, he realizes and he thinks, wait a second, ultimately, there has to be a point in what we're doing in the present moment. Ultimately, the only thing that we really have in the present moment right now is our experience, is our eating and drinking as a metaphor for all of our experiences in the present moment. And so it makes no sense for us to turn all of this negative and to look at this completely in a negative light and to say we lost all of the present because we lost control over the produce and the product and the outcome of the present. So 1 second, let's think about this. It must be, we can observe that this is part of the bigger picture. All of this is in God's hand, meaning all of this is part of the big picture that we are experiencing in the world. And it makes no sense for us to turn all of this negative and to turn all of our experience and everything that we're doing in the present moment with our effort into something negative. And at the same time, we can see it and we should see it and we must realize that what we're doing in the present moment is positive and has a positive side to it. Isn't there a reason, doesn't it make sense for us to realize and to see and to experience our present consumption, eating and drinking in a positive way and turn those efforts into something positive and turn those experiences into something positive to our soul, to our inner being, to our inner reality that is experiencing them in the deepest recesses of where we are and where they become something to us. Now look at something else neat that he does here in the sentence. Ein tov ba'adam she'achal v'shasa v'hera es nafsho tov ba'amalo. Look at how he uses the word good twice in the sentence in slightly different ways, and that's part of the message that he's giving us here. There is no good to man but that he should eat and drink and show his soul good by his efforts. So the good here is slightly switching. There's a good that's in the physical experience, that's in the experience itself that he's having, that the person is having as he's eating and drinking and experiencing the present moment. But then there's also the way the person turns that into something good for his soul, so to speak, meaning by using his efforts in a way that produces positivity for him and that produces an experience that's really positive for him, that experience and those efforts themselves become ultimately good, and they become a good and a positive experience for the person. So there's a certain cute little way that he's making us observe how he's using the word good, and he's turning the good that's in the actual physical experience into something that's good for our actual existence in this world and for our actual soul and for our actual inner being and inner experiencer. And so there's this little double play with the word good. Ki miyachal u'miyachush chutz mimeni. For who consumes and who experiences other than, except for myself. And here's another key of the whole matter. All of my experiences and all of my consumption, ultimately, whose is it? Who's having it? Only me, only myself. I only have my own experiences, and everybody else has only their own experiences. And so, think deeply about how this plays back into everything that he's said until now, both this week and in many of the prior verses leading up to here. All of his negative experiences and all of his positive experiences, all of them turn, in a certain sense, around the crux of what he's saying here. Because at the end of the day, I am the only one who has my experiences. So what's the point of me putting in all of those efforts and all of those experiences to ultimately lose them and to ultimately give them to somebody else, the source of all my despair? That also lies in the fact that he is ultimately the only one who has these experiences. But at the same time, all of my experiences and consumption and eating and drinking, as a metaphor, is only my own. I am the only one who expends those efforts, and I am ultimately the only one who receives the real product of all of those efforts in the present moment and in those experiences. So I better make sure, it certainly must make sense that all of them should come to me and should go to me in a certain way that's really positive to who I really am and to who I truly am. And that's the positive side of the sentence. But let's turn this one level deeper. Let's see how the same thing can be experienced and can be seen one level even deeper, another layer of the onion, but on the same subject. The word chutz in Hebrew can be except for, other than myself, but it can also be outside of me. Who experiences and who eats and drinks, who consumes outside of me? All of my experiences are only really internal to myself. They only occur inside of me. Every experience that I personally have as a result of what I do in this world, as a result of my efforts, and as a result of my experience and consumption, is ultimately only my own. I'm the only one who has them. Everybody else has their own sets of efforts and results and experiences, and they have to deal with those. But I deal only with my own. And so this is the same point that we were just making. It's not just that there's nobody else except for myself. It's even deeper. All of them occur only inside of me. All of them are only my own, and they don't even occur outside of me. All of my experiences of everything in existence and in the world is only internal to me. And so I better make sure that all of those make sense and work properly and work in a positive way for myself and the way I go about engaging with those experiences. The same thing, but slightly deeper, when we switch the meaning of the word to something slightly different. Kohelet does this all the time. Now I'm going to show you something really interesting. So, this particular set of sentences that I just explicated and we just discussed, I used one method of reading the sentence, and it's something that it's a path through these sentences that many of the commentators use, and that's probably the best and the clearest and the cleanest reading of these sentences. But there are many other ways to read parts of these sentences as well as the whole. Like everything else in Kohelet, and particularly here to some extent, but it's in many other places, these few sentences, they're almost like a choose-your-own-adventure book to those of you who have read those books. There are many different pathways through these sentences and many different ways to translate parts of them and translate the whole and put together the parts to construct the meaning of the sentence. So just to show you what I mean, I'm going to translate it briefly in a way that's exactly the opposite of everything I just said. And I'm going to show you how that can be equally read into the same sentence, but that how the opposite message is actually in there, and it's not actually a contradiction. It's meant to fit together with everything that I just said. So pay attention. Ein tov ba'adam she'ochal v'shasav v'heras nafsho tov ba'amalo. Gam zo ra'isi ani ki miyad ha'elohim hi. There is no good to man that he should eat and drink and try to show his soul good through his efforts. I realize this, for everything is from God's hand. Everything is in God's control, and there's no way for us to control what we do here. So what's the point of eating and drinking? And what's the point of focusing on our present enjoyment in the moment? Since, as a continuation of everything I've just said until now, we have no control over it, and there's no point in it, and there's nothing for us to do here. So now suddenly the same sentence is a continuation of all of the despair until now. And the reason you can do this in Hebrew is because the except, in Tov Adam Shiachal V'Shasa, there's no good to man, but except for that he should eat and drink. In the Hebrew, that's silent in the sentence. So you can read it both positive and negative. And it's purposeful. You can see the way the sentence is constructed. It could have been written slightly differently, and it's put together seemingly purposefully for us to read through the sentence these various different ways and come away with these different meanings. So now you see how the sentence can be completely negative as a perfect and exact continuation of all of the points that Kohelet had been making in the prior sentence. And it's an equally legitimate meaning of this reading of the sentence. But it's not a contradiction, because both of these fit perfectly together, and they're both saying two sides of the same thing. If we continue along Kohelet's path that he'd laid out previously on the negative side, on the despairing side, and we focus purely on pleasure and on material possession and building our ownership and our pleasures completely for ourselves in this world, then we're leaping towards the negative side. And we're going to end up in a situation where ultimately it's not going to make sense for us. And we're going to be despairing because we'll lose control and we'll be unable to have a continuation of that enjoyment and to use and to guarantee that use of all of those efforts, and the product of those efforts will be to our liking. But on the other hand, if we flip the calculus and we live on the other side of the sentence, the way Kohelet lays out, and we use all of the present experiences and everything that we do to the positive end in this construction, and we live it in a way that we create those experiences as good for our soul, in a way that works in a good way for us, then suddenly all of this makes sense. And our present reality and our future present realities that we will experience suddenly become good. And all of that is in this sentence. And there are other ways to read it. I'm not going to bore you into going into 5 or 10 different readings of the sentence. But they're all in there, and they all work together like different parts of a puzzle, and they all fit together to bring out the ultimate meaning of the sentence. And it's amazing the way all of this is structured inside these poetic sentences that are meant to be pulled apart and played out, and to really put in effort, to put in amal, effort to try to understand them and to make them make sense to you and to make you understand what was intended to be said. And when you do that, they suddenly become into focus, and you can understand what was meant to be put into these sentences. They're not surface level, they're very deep, and you really have to play the parts and the words against each other to really understand what's being said. You know, people think that studying Kohelet is very sad and depressing. I hope you're beginning to see that that's not the case at all. Number one, it's actually very interesting and fun to really try to work through these puzzles and to really try to understand the depth of what's happening here. But more importantly, and more truly, just beneath the seemingly surface messages of sadness or despair, there are actually very, very deep messages of truth and optimism and positivity. And I hope that by delving into the depth of the meaning of these sentences with me, you'll be able to see the very deep and beautiful and profound messages that in some sense have a negative side to them, just like everything else in the world. There's no way to avoid some negativity. But on a very profound and deep level, they're really messages of true beauty and optimism and reality and positivity. Thank you for joining us this week. Come back again next week. We're going to talk about death next week, and it's sure to be truly interesting and fun experience.